Welcome back, class. Let's go ahead and finish up our week on family systems theory. So I'm going to go straight into it and talk with you about strategic therapy, which is the approach of Jay Haley and the Palo Alto Group. And we have the Palo Alto Group right there on our title slide here, and that is William Fry, John Weakland, Gregory Bateson, and all the way on the right is Jay Haley. And here's a quote that I use all the time with clients who are struggling with choosing their goals and choosing what to invest their time in, and how challenging that can be to feel like you're putting a lot of work and time into something that's not paying off just yet. It is impossible to win a contest with a helpless opponent, since if you win, you have won nothing, right? And so I use that as a way to generate the desire to experience the challenge, and that if you are winning easily because your opponent is helpless, and the opponent is not always another person, by the way, this is a metaphor, then you really are doing a challenge that's too easy for you, and it's not going to lead to fulfillment in life. And so this quote is really applicable in a lot of counseling I do with different addictions, process addictions, or helping students to succeed in their college degree or their grad school degree. I have a lot of clients who are academics who are really wondering, why is this so hard? And trying to inspire them to enjoy the difficulty and to see the challenge and the triumph that you'll eventually feel as being worthwhile. So then how does this apply to family systems? Well, family systems are going to have a lot of communications going back and forth and across different members, right? This is a lot more complex than doing individual therapy where you're worrying about one person. Now, you can do strategic family therapy with one person. It just has to do with the focus of the counselor and the focus of how you're talking about the issue in treatment. If you're talking about the person as the member of a family system, then you can certainly start looking at strategic therapy as something you're doing. A key concept in this theory is the communication of double binds. And double binds are where the words that are spoken, but the inflection, the tone, and the meaning of the message are two very different things. So, for example, a couple may be having a bit of a disagreement about where they are going to eat dinner. And this is a harmless example, right? I'm sure we've all experienced this with our significant other or other family members. And so after talking for 30 or 40 minutes without finding a place where we're going to go, one of the spouses may say, "I don't care, just do what you want." Now, if you look at the words literally, they just said, "I don't care, just do what you want." And by extension, they said, "Just pick something, I'll be okay with whatever you picked." But the tone dramatically changes what they mean, because the spouse is actually indicating, "I don't feel heard, and if you choose something that goes against the things I'm telling you that I would be interested in, then you're showing me how much I matter in your decision-making process." Or it could even be a threat. If you choose what you want instead of what I want, then you just wait and see what happens later. And so the problem with double bind communications and double bind responses is they hurt people. And they also keep the relationship immature, so you cannot talk about what is actually happening. You're always trying to maintain appearances of being cordial when you're not cordial at all. You're actually threatening each other and manipulating each other. But no one has the courage to face the communication straight on and do something strategic to change it. And so these are the dominant patterns in a family's interactions over periods of time. And strategic therapy exists so that we can highlight those and we can help the family move in a direction to short circuit that faulty communication system. So a dysfunctional family system is going to have rigid, repetitive patterns of interaction. And what that means is the parents are going to shut down the children are going to impact the other children and manipulate their boundaries and take their things and not acknowledge their own autonomy. And then when you cross generational boundaries, then you have children who are parentified. They may have the responsibilities of an adult, but the emotional and biological maturity of a 14 or 15-year-old. And what happens there is people are elevated in their roles, but they don't have the maturity to handle the role. And so this is a problem. Now, that doesn't mean you can't trust your children with responsibility, but it needs to be within their developmental scope. And so what we're looking at as strategic therapists is we're trying to see these repetitive patterns and, like I said, cut through the pattern, break the cycle, and give people different roles and give people different expectations for their boundaries and enhance the communications to where they can overcome the double bind, overcome the dysfunctional routine. A healthy family doesn't have these problems at all. They have congruent hierarchies. Everyone understands their role. The rules are clear and the communications are at face value. What you hear is what you mean. And that's overall the best way for a family to do business. But a lot of families really struggle with understanding how to do this. And so family therapy becomes an option that they really need to take advantage of. And like I said, break the cycle. That is the number one goal of strategic therapy, is you identify the faulty cycle and you break it. As a counselor, you help families to notice it, help them to observe it when it happens, help them to identify alternate paths that they can take, different roles that they can assume, ways to relieve pressure from other people and support each other rather than manipulate them and break them down, ways to see everyone succeed instead of deliberately putting people in a place where you know they're going to fall short or fail. And so when we change the routine patterns of faulty communication and replace it with congruent and healthy communication where messages are clearly delivered and received by both parties, now we're able to break that faulty strategy and initiate a new healthy cycle. And that's really the goal of this therapy approach. So the first task you're going to do, you see the therapy room, you see all those seats. This can be a very crowded counseling room, so you want to have the space to do this. But you want everyone in the household to attend. So if you did take the time to watch Minuchin's folding the laundry video, that's a really good example of some strategic therapy elements. And I mentioned in that lecture that I learned structural and strategic family therapy as they are one thing in my family therapy class. And you're learning them separately because of the structure of this textbook. And that's okay. It's good to separate them out and see which elements belong to which researcher, whether it's Haley in the Palo Alto group or Minuchin, and that's fine. But you have everyone in the household attend. You treat the family itself. Everyone must be there because that is my client, right? No one person in the room is your client. There might be an identified patient, so you can use insurance because that's how our world works. But ultimately, the family is your client. So if one person is missing, we reschedule the appointment because I need everyone. And then you engage in different activities. So you interact with them, you directly talk to each member, you give them ideas to conceptualize, puzzles to solve. You get social with them, you just watch the family socialize as well. And you want to see the natural interaction patterns, and you can create scenarios in the session to get them to do this, such as building things with blocks and seeing who assumes the leadership role, who waits for instructions, who is the rebel that kind of makes the pattern of solving the problem less efficient. And these are important things to observe because strategically you need to know what pieces are on the board, right? If we're using a metaphor for chess. You can't have pieces in chess behave in ways that do not match the type of piece they are. And family therapy is very much that from a strategic point of view, is you don't want people who are lacking the skills to carry out a task to be the ones charged with carrying out a task. And so task setting at the end of the session and giving the family something to try out that's different with more healthy roles and more healthy communications, that is a critical task of you as the counselor. If you don't require them to do any changing outside the therapy session, this is going to be a very long process and ultimately an inefficient one. And again, family rules are really important. You'll see the methods of communication, and you'll actually give the family directives to interact with these rules of communication. So if you notice that certain people engage in double bind communications, you'll issue a directive to short circuit that and break the cycle. If you see two siblings who don't play well together, you're going to issue a directive and break the cycle. Maybe have a third person play with them to keep the peace, and then teach them how to be peaceful together. Or force them to clean up the blocks that have been used for the family activity at the end, even though everyone could help. You specifically ask those two siblings to engage in teamwork to help each other. And then another thing to notice is ordeals. And these are little dances of repetitive behavior that families get into that make the problem worse. And you will you will observe these in your counseling room. You can draw attention to them, and you can get involved in them to break the cycle yourself. So you can step in and issue your authority as the clinician to work on breaking that and forming a more strategic cycle that they can follow. Change the script, change the dance. And if there's a set of rules or communication patterns that don't work for the family, bring that to the family's attention, everyone's attention, not just the leader of the family, because ultimately the leader of the family may have all the information but not know what to do with it. And so you're calling everyone to action with your techniques as the counselor. Here is the list of techniques from the textbook and other things that came to my mind as I was completing this PowerPoint for you today. And I think it's really important to shift the pattern, break the cycle. If you see things that aren't working, you can give power to people who don't normally have the power. You can give people the ability to issue instructions in their own family directives when usually they're the follower. This is called reversing the hierarchy. And a lot of times the people in control of a dysfunctional strategic system are not using that power to the best effect. And so when you reverse the hierarchy, you give them a chance to feel what it feels like to be a follower. And then that can create an aha moment. And then if it works successfully in the session, you can give praise to the person who issued the new directive. And that's a really good idea. Another thing is, from a paradoxical perspective, you can give pretend directives. These are not directives you want the family to take with them outside of the therapy room. They're just fake directives that you want the family to play with during the therapy session so that they can learn a lesson from it. So all of these are really interesting and very smart. It turns the family into a chessboard, and you are the person playing the game. And you want to empower the pieces to have their own decision making so that they can play the game just as well outside of the therapy room. And that's really how I think about this process. And now let's talk about Murray Bowen and his own approach to Bowenian Family Systems Therapy. I have a genogram up on the slide, and I have a quote from Bowen that I think illustrates where he's coming from with his approach. The overall goal of counseling is to help family members become systems experts who could know their family system so well that the family could readjust itself without the help of an expert. And that is what we are always doing in all of these theories. We are empowering the client to make positive change without us, because there will always come a time where they no longer meet with us. It's true for every client that comes through our door. There are so many from early in my career, I wonder how they turned out. And we don't get the end of that story very often. And Bowen is saying, if I didn't teach them how to do this without me, then I've missed the goal of why I'm a counselor. So remember that we are always trying to build people up in the moment, but we're also trying to train them to live a healthy, well-adjusted, positive mental health life, even if they're not meeting with us anymore. That's where Bowen's coming from with his model. And his model really talks about differentiation from the system. So you see here the penguins. There's just one penguin that is completely different than the others. And that's fine. We want to encourage the individual expression of people within the family. We want the family to encourage this expression of human development. And we want people to be all the best versions of themselves while they're still contributing effectively to the family system. And Bowen started understanding this when he would work with schizophrenics at his clinic. And the problem is, you see these people with these shattered psyches where there's so many experiences in their mind that are not exactly connected to reality, but there are some little inklings of truth in those experiences that have come from a fragmented family system. He started to realize the impact of the family on sending these messages that break a person's mental spirit. And that led to understanding that it's important for people to receive clear messages and also to be empowered and encouraged to be a better version of themselves, because the manipulation of being told these mixed messages in a family and receiving all this dysfunction from the genogram crushing down on us, it changes people. And Bowen started to see this and realized that, we shouldn't be negatively impacted just because we're the more colorful and unique penguin in a sea of uniformity. And so differentiation of self from the family of origin is the key concept here. And what I want to encourage all of you to understand is this is the key concept, that when you add this in, you take structural and strategic, and you take satir-based concepts, and you add differentiation, and we have a really powerful way to impact people, that you can be part of a family and also be the best version of yourself. When you develop that self, you contribute more positive things into the family, and the family will benefit from you being that person for you because you're being that person for them. It's a symbiote circle. It's not like individuation is the complete abandonment of caring for your family at all. Another thing to realize is that families create structures within themselves, and we see these in genograms all the time. You'll see a person sending red lines out to one person and green lines out to another person, and you'll see dotted lines going out from that person to the red line person, and that creates a triangle. And the triangle is, I don't like that person, I like you, can you send this message to the person I don't like? And that happens all the time in families. It happens all the time in friendships. It happens in the workplace. And it happens in the classroom. And I have this diagram of an example of a relationship triangle that occurs in high school. It occurs in college. It even happens at GCU, where sometimes a student will have a conflict with a teacher. And that's like a red line on a genogram. And they have a green line with their parent. And the parent person or the counselor or whoever it is that they feel is on their side, they will send the negative message that should go to the teacher to that other person. So high school student gets the parent involved. The parent sends a nasty email to the teacher, when really the teacher and the student should be the ones communicating in the classroom, right? So that's a relationship triangle. And we see it in therapy all the time. I had a client recently who, it wasn't even a relationship triangle. It was a billing issue. He's having his parents pay for counseling. He's doing these sessions with me. And I didn't have a release of information for the father. I only had one for the mother. And the father called and had all these questions about his son's therapy, and I couldn't answer because I don't have a release of information. So that's a harmless, calm example of a triangle. Like, I could have had a release of information for both parents, but I didn't know when we were doing the intake appointment that I would need to talk to the father. I was only aware that the mother was paying for sessions. So, just a little thing to think about in the real world application of what we're doing, that releases of information give us the opportunity to break confidentiality and share information with people who deserve that information. And, without that, it's a bit of a relationship triangle. Anyway, back to Bowenian concepts. When a person has a solid sense of self, they can have more effective contact with their family. And that's what we're encouraging people to do. We don't want these triangles. We don't want these faulty communications. We don't want these terrible cycles that create us versus them. We want harmony, and we want everyone growing in a positive direction. And that is something Bowen is talking about. Now, with the genograms, Bowen went a really neat direction with this. He started to notice that problems get passed down from the family line. And so I have here an image I put together with a quote from one of the more recent Star Wars films and some screenshots from those movies and promotional art. And what we have here is on the bottom, we have the father of the story, the grandfather of the story now, Darth Vader, but in his younger self, Anakin Skywalker. He's just accepted the dark side, which doesn't sound like a very positive mental health decision to make. And that created ripple effects across the galaxy in that fictional universe. And as soon as his grandson found out the truth about his family system, sure enough, the decision to also accept the dark side is made. And in a mental health context, this is very similar to a child who understands that alcoholism is a bad idea because they see their parent being an alcoholic and they understand the chaos that causes in a family in their life as a child. But then sure enough, when they become an adult and the decision is in front of them, how much alcohol am I going to drink in my routine? They're at higher risk to becoming an alcoholic themselves. And you can believe something is a bad pattern for a family, but that doesn't change your decision making later in life. And this is why genograms can be such an effective tool. It's on paper, it's sort of scientific, it's using the client's own words about their family history to highlight how dangerous these decisions are. It's not just something that's limited to our fictional stories. It happens in our genograms as well. Multi-generational transmission is where the family shows you on paper, on their genogram, their average level of chronic anxiety over time. And remember that. Some families have very low anxiety over time, and then just a little anxiety in their family system can feel overwhelming. And some families, anxiety is the status quo, and so only chronic anxiety gets their attention, like the Skywalkers, right? The whole galaxy has to be in turmoil in order for any change to be possible, it seems. And you're going to be treating families that are very much like that. And so I wanted to create an example that would stick with you, and now you have multi-generational transmission illustrated to us in the movies of Star Wars. So let's go to the next slide. And we've talked about dysfunction, that average level of anxiety over time. Not all anxiety is real. Some of it is imagined. And so it's not just about what we see and what we think, but it's about the message that we store inside ourselves. How that thought process becomes the story over time of what this family is and what it's all about. And because we're dealing with families, it's not just the choices of one person, it's the choices of everyone involved. So we have the subsystems, like in the structure of the family, like the parental subsystem, the couple relationship, the parental role, right? So we have the couple subsystem, the parental role, the resulting child behavior, and then the distance. So now we're talking about boundaries here. So you see how Bowen is bringing all the ideas together to create a really robust approach to treating family systems. So what we want to do is assist the individuals in differentiating from the family of origin, which should result in a reduction of anxiety, and the level of chronic anxiety over time for the whole family will decrease as each individual level of anxiety felt decreases. So we want to get a really good perspective of what that family is and how they do their business. As far as counseling goes, we're coaching them. We are objective and we're not getting entangled in their own stuff. We do not want to become part of our own triangle with family members. We are not the message bearer. We are not the secret keeper. We have a firm objective, which is to help each person differentiate. If it's good for one person, it should be good for everyone. We are not getting into this game of passing messages and playing telephone. We are here to get everyone on a positive life direction, and we have to believe that that's possible. So the process of therapy goes as such. We emphasize insight as we're collecting information, and then we want people to behave in a way that's different than the status quo, right? Taking the status quo back into our conversation. And then the family system, We have to teach the family how the actions of one person ripple through the family and affect other people. Even messages coming from adults down to children, that shapes the development of the children. So we want everyone to be able to understand at a developmentally appropriate way what's happening in the family system and what actions we can take to shift those dynamics to give everyone a fair chance to develop. And then you're going to give assignments to the family to use in the home environment, because if the only change is happening in the therapy room, this is not going to last. It's not going to be an effective shift. And that's what we're aiming for with a Bowenian approach. So we're going to do a lot of coaching. We're going to talk about the journey of each member being part of the family week to week, month to month, year to year. And that helps to identify who is differentiated and who is very much a cog in the system, a follower, a person who's not developing their own identity. And then we want to also break the triangles, break the cycle, so force people to communicate who do not naturally go into communication mode. And then we can also take time to pay attention to double binds and mixed messages and other things like that. And so if you're interested in any of these techniques, please pursue information about them as you're writing your paper if you chose a Bowenian approach. That is a really good strategy for doing our weekly assignments. And these are the things that help you to actually do the therapy once it's your turn to practice these approaches. So if you don't learn about the techniques and interventions, then it's just concepts in your mind that aren't going to translate into counselor behaviors. So you want to keep these in mind as little plays in your playbook that you can initiate when you're talking with people. And that will create your own style for therapy that maybe has some Bowenian feel to it. So the behavior comes from the power base of the system. So the messages come down, multi-generational transmission shapes the environment for people who are developing in the family. Everyone impacts everyone. So the actions of one impacts everyone around them. And we have to be able to use that concept appropriately, effectively, and fairly, because we're not going to sugarcoat things and say that people can overcome things. If the family is not giving the right environment to overcome things, then we need to call that out and make that part of the structure of our Bowenian approach. We want to have a good research basis, so understand your techniques and interventions. That's really important, because if you're not sure something's going to work, it probably won't. You have to believe in what you're doing, and I think research legitimizes the approach. And if we know our stuff in our mind, when we go to do it, we're going to have extra confidence, and that's going to trickle down into the perception of the client as to how valuable their therapy time is. And I'm supposed to be learning from this. So another thing to remember is there is some limitation to this. It is a strategy of therapy that is based on the white middle class family model. Not every family is going to match that template. And so you want to be able to look at the family in front of you and modify your approach for something that's reasonably going to work for them. And if you do that, then you're being culturally competent, you're being sensitive to the needs of your actual family, and you're not just doing a cookie cutter family systems approach. You should never be doing that. You want to actually deliver therapy that works for the family in front of you. So here's a recap of the chapter. Satir focuses on communication and self-esteem. Structural, from Salvador Minuchin, is about the interplay between the subsystems, togetherness, and individuality. Strategic therapy and Jay Haley focuses on the interactional patterns and hierarchies, moving people strategically across the family board like chess pieces. And Bowenian family systems therapy is about the differentiation of self, the context of the family, and the multi-generational transmission of issues across subsystems and generations, down from adults to children. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for hanging in and watching this video. We're at 29 minutes. I hope you found it helpful for creating your paper this week and completing our family systems unit in counseling theories. And I will talk with you next week going into postmodern theories of counseling. Have a great day, everyone.